Good evening, everybody. I was just handed a note here that says, please add Jerry Shepard to your prayer list. He's Barbara and Leon Northcutt's son-in-law. And many of you know the Northcutts. He's having some major surgery tomorrow. And his lungs are not moving, they said. So that's Jerry Shepard, the Northcutt's son-in-law. We had a very good meeting this afternoon here. Deacons and elders and ministers all together and give a little bit of reporting. And I was just going to mention a few things tonight before we get into the lesson, because it ties in with what we were talking about tonight, about our invisible faith. I know a lot of you don't see everything that's happening. You hear maybe through a few people what's going on here and there. But there was a discussion, first of all, about the Student Center and the work that's going on, and a lot of things that Craig, who's now our new campus minister, for anybody that might not know that, and been heavily involved in just trying to get started with the new year, just ready to take off just very shortly. Get a lot of things done and fixed and repaired over at the Student Center, and get to know the whole work all together at one time. He's doing very effective work, and he's involved with student directors and the retreat that's coming up very soon for them, and then working on the focus for the whole year. If you're here this morning, you know that the theme that they chose for this year, and they're going to have a theme every year, is Light the Fire, which is an appropriate one for us too when you think about that. Then there was some discussion about mission work, and Chris Willis mentioned some things that we're doing. We're adding a little bit of extra work both in Nicaragua and also in Petapudi, India. Some efforts that are going on in both places to just try to benefit the work. Maybe you saw the slides this morning or this evening that showed the pictures of the flooring that was completed at the church building, and their appreciation to Essential for helping them complete the cost on that. It did not cover everything that they had done, but they had paid for a good portion of that themselves, but wanted to go ahead and finish it up, and so that went for their effort and all. We discussed technology and equipment, so hoping to upgrade our work here at Central as far as being able to tape what's going on here in CD rate, putting things on the website, and making that available in a variety of different places. And so those are some of the things there as technology is concerned. The youth and last leaders were discussed. Bible Bowl, kickoff coming up very soon on that. Classes that they're doing at Central hosting the Bible Bowl in April. Prayer times were discussed and some things going on in that direction on some specifics. We hosted the last quarterly prayer meeting here at Central just a few weeks back for area congregations, and it was a blessing for those that had the opportunity to attend. We talked about benevolence, and some of that relates to the pantry items and other things just relating to needs that a lot of people call about. We normally don't respond to a lot of the financial requests, but we do almost always respond to the food items that are there, making sure that people have the basics there on that. And transportation, everything's continuing to do well in that. We appreciate the efforts in that direction, and our finances is doing well. I don't know if you keep up on a week-to-week basis. There are a few members that do. And notice when we're ahead or when we're behind and how things are going. And that's not the case in a lot of congregations. And it's part of the lesson. I was thinking about that this morning when we talked about excelling during a time of depression, talking about economics. I hear of a lot of churches that aren't doing that well because it's a down time. But Central's not facing that. And that means you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and adding in that. So those are some great things that came about from our meeting, and I just took a few notes on that and wanted to share that with you. Let's start out in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 tonight, as we talk about this invisible faith. Somewhere in that process, we'll talk about that in just a second, how it seems to disappear. But Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, a well-known passage by a lot of people, maybe basic for some, but the basic ingredient or description or definition for what faith is. And many of you can quote that, and maybe in 2 or 3 translations. But faith is the substance of things hoped for, and the evidence of things not yet seen. So the first thing we look at here is that faith, this invisible faith, and it's invisible because you can't see it in me, and I can't see it in you, and you're supposing because I get up here every morning I must have faith. I could be faking it. Not that it can be done. Ministers have. A lot of leaders have. And that's not what we want to talk about as far as faking it. But it's in the top topics here we're talking about here. But faith, first of all, there's a substance about our faith. Although we don't see it, we know we have it. It's there, and it is just as real to us, and can be wounded or offended or troubled or strong in any direction as anything else. Faith is as solid or more solid than the podium you see here in front of you. And I just use that as a representation because it's big, it's massive. Some podiums aren't, but some faces are weak and some kind of clear, like some podiums. But there's substance. And we'll look and talk about that in just a moment. But number 2, faith has an evidence about it. There's evidence in the faith. It demonstrates, just as valid as any kind of evidence out there, that you would present in a court case. It was expressed some time ago. If you were brought to court and they were pressing charges against you that you were a faithful Christian, would there be enough evidence to prosecute you? Well, if being a faithful Christian is a crime, I hope there's enough evidence for any one of us that we could go down the list and look at our calendars and our giving and you see your schedules and where you go and what you do and what you give and all these other things demonstrate. And that's the point there. Now look at verse 6 here, because there's another thing about this real faith that we have here. A real faith pleases God. But without faith, verse 6 says, without faith it's impossible to please Him. Now, the word impossible doesn't show up too many times in the Bible. It talks about it's impossible for God to lie. And there are occasions where you see something going on there, and what looks to be impossible all of a sudden becomes possible when God enters the picture. But here the term is used about us and our faith, or our lack of it. Without it, it's impossible to please God. And you're here tonight, and I'm here tonight, because we want to please God. And at the very basis of everything we're looking at here, we're looking at our faith. And the fact that it needs to please God. Well, besides real faith, there's also fake faith, because you have tuned into these TV channels, maybe just passing through, and you've seen some of the things going on. Or, I pick out TV channels because it's easy to spot something out there and not pick out anything or anybody particular that you may know. Because I don't want to identify an individual and just sound judgmental over them. But we do know that there are some that are faking it. And we read about some in the Bible. And the fake faith, number 1, has no substance, has no evidence, and as we're looking at the whole process, and it doesn't please God either. Now, in this whole process here, as we're looking at what's going on, I want to jump over to the passage that we read a while ago from the book of James, and look at then chapter 5, or rather chapter 3, 2, get it right yet. And talk about this idea of faith, exactly what it means for us. James, as he's discussing this, gives us an illustration about our faith in verses 19 and following. He starts at verse 14 and talks about, obviously, something not going right. Interesting to notice, as we talked before when we're talking about James, that James, in all likelihood, being identified with 1 or 2, 3 Jameses that lived during that time, my speculation, and some scholars believe, that is mine and the real scholars out there, in other words, that this is the half-brother of Jesus. The one, if he was the half-brother of Jesus, who would have, above all else out there, the authors of the New Testament, have a wealth of visual material from inside the house, watching his older brother on what faith is really about and trusting God. And so he says now, verse 14, what does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith, or such a faith like that, in other words, save you? It's a rhetorical question. The answer is no. He doesn't even put in there no. He knows you know. It's just understood. But obviously, the people that he's addressing at that time are at least in part wrestling with who does and who doesn't. And some of the people out there are really faking it. And if that's possible, to be missing it and not know it, that's scary to me. And makes me want to stop and really analyze. Am I part of that category? Then moving on down, verses 19 and following. He said, you believe that there's one God. We profess that now. Well, continuing on, it says, you do well. Not really, we could put in there. Because even the demons believe and tremble. So that puts us on the scale of where the demons are at. And I don't want to be on that same wavelength. Nobody does. So there's got to be something more about our faith to get us outside of that realm of where the demons are. But do you not know, verse 20, O foolish man, that is possibly someone reading that faith without works is dead. And now he illustrates. Was not Abraham, our father, justified by works? You know, there's a place in the Bible that says he's justified by faith, the very same guy. In dealing with the issue of where works, at that point, is talking about the works of the Old Testament law. But this is not what he's talking about. He's talking about what Abraham did in a pursuit of demonstrating his faith. And then he talks about it. He was justified by our works when he offered Isaac, his son, on the altar. Now that's different than the way the Jewish people were looking at being justified by works. Talking about all the Jewish celebrations and things they did, from circumcision to all the other things that fit along with that ritual. He's talking about something different here. Now let's take just a moment and look over to Genesis chapter 22, where this actually takes place and is discussed. First book of the Old Testament, first book of the Bible, chapter 22. Now it came to pass, verse 1 says, that after these things, God tested Abraham. I want you to realize that a real faith will be illustrated when it can be tested. When it can demonstrate through a test or some kind of trial that it's real. I don't know if our faith really demonstrates itself as being real until it is tested in a tough way. It's easy, according to Satan, when he's talking to God, it's easy for Job to say, I love you, God, and I follow you, because you give him everything out there. But let me take away the things that he has and see if he still holds his faith and trusts you. Remember, in the discussion of the book of Job in the Old Testament. So there was a test that Satan was wanting to throw out, and God allowed the test to take place. But what happened in the whole pursuit was it demonstrated through testing, and an illustration was there, that there was a faith. So God tested, Genesis 22, Abraham. You probably read the story. God asked for, next few verses it tells, take your son, your only son, and go offer him. And so God goes. Or rather, Satan, get right here. Abraham goes. And he leaves with Isaac. He leaves with the wood. He leaves with the fire, but he doesn't leave with a lamb for a sacrifice because he's going to be offering his son. It's in his mind. He doesn't have any other options inside his back pocket or front pocket. It's there. And as he heads out, his son even asks him about it. Can you imagine? You lay the wood on the back of your son. He's helping carry the load, by the way. And you get to the place and your son says, hey, Father, you're getting forgetful in your old age. We've got everything except the lamb. God will provide, Abraham says. And so as you remember, as it comes down to that, Abraham lifts the sword up, or the knife, and he's about to take his son's life when God stops him. And he says in verse 12, now I know that you fear God, for you've not withheld your son, your only son, from me. God looks for opportunities for us to demonstrate our faith. The testing of that pleases God when we shine like we should. God, we're so proud. And when you think about what is going on in Genesis 22, run a parallel quickly to the book of Job and recognize that Job was a pawn in the midst of a discussion between Satan and God. Was this not also happening in Genesis 22, except we don't see behind the curtain? Was not Satan involved in some of that, trying to get things to go, and yet it didn't happen? And now God says, I know. I firmly believe now. You demonstrate that. The faith that God is looking for in us is substance. It's evidence. It can be tested. It can be proven, and it shows what we're at. Now, it's hard to hide true faith. We're not made to go around and just show off our works. God's not looking for that as an answer from us. But it's just going to show. It's going to be demonstrated in a humble way, and yet it's going to be there. I suppose, had not this been written in the book of Genesis in chapter 22, we'd never heard about what Abraham did and how his faith was demonstrated and proven because of the testing. Think about it for just a few moments, because when you look at your life and the things that you go through, and they don't get written up in the Bible, they're not written up in the bulletin. Maybe a close friend knows and nobody else. And after the whole thing has gone by and you've gone through the whole testing and the whole process, you look back and you go, what was that exercise all about? I mean, I was stressed, and I got through, and I still love God on, but nobody grew from it except maybe you in that process. But remember, our faith isn't just about other people looking at us as much as also God looking at what's going on. Don't forget that relationship. Don't forget what Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6 is, that our faith is demonstrated to not the rest of the world out there, but to God, to please Him. So when nobody else sees what you've just done for God, God sees. Now, He's not penning it in a Bible somewhere. You don't get it highlighted on a bulletin board or a billboard somewhere, and it doesn't get in a bulletin article, but yet, God sees it. And in that way, we can say it's an invisible faith. It's demonstrated, and God sees it, though the rest of the world doesn't. But it's visible to God. What rings out in the book of Revelation is so interesting. In chapters 1, 2, and 3, as Jesus is talking to those 7 churches, and He's dictating, literally, a letter, John the Apostle, older in age now, exiled on the island of Patmos, is penning away these notes to all 7 of these churches of Asia. Over and over again, each time it addresses to a different church, the response comes back from Jesus, I know your works. I know what you're dealing with. Now, he has some tough things to say for just about every one of those churches. But he also has some good things. And he starts out in talking to each one of them. I know your works. To one of them he says, I know you live on Satan's throne. And it's got to be tough to live in an area like that and to still call yourself a Christian. I know your works. So when we talk about our faith, and yes, it's something that is invisible in the sense you can't see it inside the person, but sometimes when you're demonstrated, it's just between you and God. That's all it needs to be. Because we're really after pleasing God in all that we do. Maybe some other times it's demonstrated to other people. And God chooses to do it in a certain way, and when it happens, and somebody else can back up and they can gain encouragement out of it. Not that we're going to boast over it, but they look at that and they go, wow, I didn't think he has it in him. Or she had that in her to do that. Boy, that challenges me. I can do better now. And so God is after that. Now when we look at what's going on, again, back to James in chapter 2. Verses 24 and 26.